Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up and coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And now that I've thoroughly exhausted talking about Backrooms and its various you could have done that better moments, it's time to crack into a much more straightforward example of when an otherwise perfectly fine genre movie is spoiled by a rather blatant dramatic miscalculation so early on that no matter what it continues to do right, or at least competently, you've still got that nagging you could have done that better tingler crawling up your neck that, for all practical purposes, compromises the experience of the movie to a permanent end. Our new standard exemplar for this phenomenon today is Tuner, released a couple weekends ago. This is a crime thriller that stars Neo Woodall as Nicky, an apprentice piano tuner from New York City with severe hyperacusis. Basically, his eardrums are so sensitive to noises that not too optimal in the place he was born and raised. Any prolonged exposure causes him physical pain, the louder and more sustained the noise being all the more debilitatingly threatening. Nicky works for a master tuner named Harry, played ably to charming, chill perfection by Dustin Hoffman. Harry was a close friend of Nicky's late father, both of them steeped in the classic and jazz communities of the storied city. Nicky himself was once a piano prodigy, and though he of course had to give up his dreams from an early age due to his condition, he retains not only a perfect sense of pitch, but also a remarkable sense of echoic memory. Basically, he has a photographic memory, but for sounds, and especially music. Both these traits come in handy when Harry, his own cognitive abilities lapsing with age, forgets the combination to his and his wife's personal safe. After only one night watching tutorials on YouTube, Nicky is able to crack the combination. By coincidence, while working late into the night solo on a piano owned by a predictably uber-wealthy client, the hypersensitive Nicky is disturbed by what turns out to be three thugs led by Yuri Lioraz trying to drill into an upstairs safe. Yuri and his goons are Israeli immigrants who run a home security company that is really just a front for a larger illicit racket. They hire out their services to New York's aristocracy and then take advantage of them by stealing valuable but small amounts that they think nobody will notice. Determined to return to his work without having to listen to these mooks try to drill into a safe, Nicky cracks the combination and, of course, gets Yuri's card. Fast forward a bit, Harry has a severe stroke and goes into a coma, exorbitant hospital fees pile up, and you guessed it, Nicky ends up going into work for these dudes after all, gets in too deep, and yes, this is also complicated by a budding New York love affair, Nicky becoming quite smitten with a student pianist and composer named Ruthie, played by Havana Rose Liu. Tuner is directed and co-written by one Daniel Rohrer, whose previous feature-length works have all been documentaries. In fact, Rohrer's last documentary came out just this past March, but with seasoned screenwriter Robert Ramsey as a collaborator, Tuner marks his first transition into fiction, and it wouldn't betray the director's previous experience at all. This isn't a case of a documentary filmmaker moving into more docu-fictional or neo-realistic territory, blurring the line between documentary and fiction film. This is very much a leap into lean formula genre filmmaking. And basically, Rohrer and Ramsey have just put their thumb on a classic formula within a formula, the minor hook or gimmick or change-up that takes an otherwise predictable potboiler crime flick and makes the cliches go down a little easier. A guy with highly sensitive ears becoming a safe cracker. At that point, all you gotta do is make sure you got a tight, economical script, some picturesque but not too showy production in cinematography and editing, and really the most important part, a sympathetic cast, and Tuner is pretty uniformly satisfactory in all of those fronts, especially in the cast. And that's not to undersell Rohrer's very apparent talent for not just deploying a minor hook or gimmick to justify telling a story in a mediocre, inoffensive way. There is a certain degree to which you're inevitably going to find yourself falling falling in and out of love with the conceit of Nikki's disability as a kind of superpower. Not only because Nikki has just a few too many superpowers already, the scene in which he gets to show off his echoic memory to Ruthie that first time, leading to their mutual infatuation. It is a touch too contrived, and it does also saddle the romantic side of the narrative with its own burdens to credibility. Basically, it's that classic thing of wounded young man who was super hot and an incredibly accomplished woman just gets so impressed by his surface level talents that she becomes infatuated. Very typical male fantasy that women are somehow impressed by things that, clearly men are more impressed by, and that shallow confidence becomes something that the film itself projects as a function of that. But there's also just the obvious cognitive dissonance that comes with having in the background of all of our heads how many times we've heard of or seen safe cracking depicted in crime movies and realizing, oh, I've seen this same story 1,000 times, but more so I've seen it enough that I know in these sorts of pot boiler crime films, Tooner isn't reinventing the wheel here, that safecrackers should be pretty standard types of guys that racketeers like Yuri would get their hands on. Yes, Tooner takes place in movie land, but we already know from movie land that you don't need disabilities as a superpower in order to do what Nikki does. But I still have to hand it to Ruhr as a director that he does not merely shoot for content. He really endeavors to incorporate how Nikki perceives the world through his disability into not only the visual but also the auditory presentation of his film. You'll be much less excited by the many safe-cracking montages as you will by how Tooner really manages to draw you into not just an emotional but a physiological sympathy with Nikki. There's a real experiential texture to Tooner that pretty much, if not for everything else just being more or less inoffensive, actually makes it a pretty compelling, if cliche, crime flick. Ruhr's fiction feature debut might have proven to be exactly the sort of middle-of-the-road genre movie you could recommend to so many people with something pithy like, think Thief meets Whiplash. And for what it's worth, Ruhr also seems to be rather blatantly using this film to gesture at the historical experience and memory of the Jewish diaspora, the influence of the Jewish diaspora upon both classical and jazz music. But also, while none of these character groups are connected to each other socially, it's telling that Nikki and Harry are both Jewish. The thugs of the film are Israeli Jews running a security company that is just a front for them stealing from people. And even the master composer that Ruthie dreams of apprenticing with, he turns out to be the descendant of Holocaust survivors. It's not the sort of thing that I think you could plot out in some kind of close reading. It's more ephemeral than that. But there's clearly something going on there that grants this project just that much added bit of texture. Also, now that I think about it, Ruthie is obviously a very biblical naming convention. And yet, I'm sorry, we gotta rewind for a bit. So returning to the first night that Nikki meets Yuri, it's late. Nikki thinks he's alone in this whole mansion. He starts hearing noise upstairs. He goes up, finds Yuri and his goons drilling into the safe incompetently. And, okay, so, Nikki, he's a disappointed guy, had his entire world thrown out of order from a young age, can't really live any kind of normal social life, especially within the noise factory that is New York City, has a low-paying job working for rich assholes who don't even appreciate how rare and fine his talents are, so, predictably, he's kind of a prick. I just don't know that he's credibly written or portrayed as the kind of jaded dude who would walk in on three guys clearly perpetrating a robbery and then not only not be fearful, but so nonplussed that he just talks back to them, nor that Yuri and his gang would be so nonchalant themselves as to, instantly thrown into one of those no going back scenarios because they now literally have a witness to a major crime. The more true crime stories you hear, it's not so much that Yuri and his goons themselves are not credibly written and portrayed enough as schmucks themselves, who are kind of just half their way through their own dumb exploits, though, quite frankly, that also becomes another refreshing part of the movie, that Yori and his guys are oh so apparently not a part of some major city-bestriding syndicate or shadowy mafia with their fingers in the pies of power. They are just a small cadre of D-listers. It's just that if you listen to enough true crime, you realize that that's simply an accurate caricature of most criminal undertakings of this kind, and that when push comes to shove, it's usually a moment just like this one, a random witness stumbling in on an act of crime where certain individuals in this idiot circus are going to do something impulsive from which there's no going back. And so what Tuner leaves you with as a major dramatic hinge point of the story is a scenario where both of these parties are so nonchalant to each other that Nikki is just asking them to wait until he's finished downstairs, and then Yori just acts a tough guy and tells him to go f himself, and then Nikki just helps them commit a major crime. This is the essence of the you could have done that better moment. Also because it's a you could have done that better moment that is clearly motivated by the same shallow confidence that is distorting the romance between Nikki and Ruthie. It's just the shallow confidence of believing you're a little too smart for your own good. It means that for no matter what else the filmmakers actually manage to not just do competently, but well, Tuner will always have the feeling of something that lost the plot before the plot even really started. And unlike last week's episode on Backrooms, the you could have done that better feeling you get from Tuner is so obvious, so apparent, even to just your average walk-in moviegoer, that you could easily imagine it being held up as like a teaching example on how not to cut corners in dramatic screenwriting. Not unlike how the filmmakers then shallowly portray the origins of the romance between Nikki and Ruthie. Do not conflate surface level feats and eccentricities of character with something that is going to impress your audience so much that they're going to suddenly forget everything they've ever absorbed about how people really work and how people in movies, even in heightened formulaic genre movies, are supposed to react. It's fine. Cromulent is the word for something like Tuner. I give it a decent 3 out of 5, but yes, the ride of what otherwise might have even made for a great new novel-ish crime thriller, again, Thief meets Whiplash, it gets really bumpy because our man Rohrer was just so cocky behind the wheel, putting the pedal to the floor, and he just drove, bam, right into that fruit stand. Anyway, I'm getting out of here. Thank you so much for sticking through this uncharacteristically short video. Please don't be a stranger to shouting out in the comments, what did I get right, what did I get wrong? Otherwise, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia, this is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. I'm gonna catch you guys next time.